Hello bead friends, we're back with a new tutorial. Today we will learn how to make our net bracelet that you see here in 3 colors, blue, green, and red. It's the bigger version of our original tutorial for the raw bracelet that you see here in purple. So if you haven't tried your hand at beading before, have a look at our previous tutorial for this bracelet because it's easier. This one is for beginners, whereas this one of today is for intermediate. So if you have never beaded before, have a look at the previous one. Today we will be making our bracelet using raw stitch, so right angle weave stitch, and working with Miyuki round beads size 11. For today's project you will need thread fireline 0.06 inches wide in transparent. Then you will need size 10 needles for beading. And then you will need 2 colors of Miyuki round beads. You will need a primary color, 9 grams of this, and then in the secondary color you will only need 3 grams of this, plus a clasp like such with 3 rings so that you can hook it up. And that's it. Today we will be making the bracelet in this gray color with secondary color copper, as you can see from the base that I've already prepared. So if you haven't already looked at the previous tutorial for the raw bracelet, have a look and prepare a base along 22 units of raw, as you can see here. So I'll put the link for the tutorial in the description of this video so you can find it easily. Once you've prepared your base, cut a new thread and place a needle on the thread, because you won't, this project actually uses quite a lot of thread, so you won't be able to use one single thread to do all of it. You'll need to add thread as needed. If you have thread left from preparing your base, you can wait until adding the thread, but I actually need a thread. So I'll start off from adding the thread at the beginning of my base. So I'll pass through, under, the thread that passes between 2 needles, pass once and leave about 5 inches of trail thread, then pass back through it again. This way I get a loop and I go through the loop with my needle. Important, this time since we're adding the thread, you will need to pull on both sides of the thread to close the knot. Otherwise you'll only pull through the thread you've just added. Once you've done that, your thread is hooked up and you can move your needle. We actually want to come at one of these top copper beads, so we'll move around. Perfect. Then add 8 gray beads to your thread. Show you in a moment. Here you go, 4 plus 4. Have them go on the thread and pass back through your copper bead from the opposite side where your thread is coming out. So we're actually doing a classic raw unit as you've made them before. So the first unit is kind of the same as the base. Go through the first 2 gray beads, like this, without adding anything. Add a copper bead to your thread. Go through the next 2 grays of the loop. Pull. You want this unit to tighten up. Then add another copper bead and go through the next 2 grays. Add a third copper bead and go through the next 2 grays. So the first unit of the second row of the bracelet is essentially done, but you see how it's not closed off, and we actually want to move over here to the left to the side of the copper bead so that we can go on adding units. So we have to go around. So I'll skip the copper bead of the base and go through the next 2 grays so that I close off the unit better. Both beads. I'm going through the first, and then I'll go through the second one and the copper one. So once you're coming out of your side copper bead of the first unit, you're ready to start the second unit. The first thing you have to pay attention to is where your thread is coming out from. If it's coming up from the top of the copper bead or if it's coming down from the bottom towards the base. In my case, it's coming out from the top. Yours should be the same. So we will be picking up, in this case, 6 gray beads. I'll explain in a moment why. So only 6, not the 8 you're accustomed to. And go through the top copper bead of the second unit of the base. And remember to go circular. So my thread is coming out from the top. I'll have to go this way towards the first unit. So keep the circular motion of your thread going. In raw stitch, the thread only goes in circle. Okay, then we'll add the 2 beads, 2 gray beads we're missing from the base. So 6 plus 2 makes 8. And we go through the copper bead that we started off from. So actually this unit is just a fragmented unit because we already have 2 of the copper beads because we're using the bottom base and the side one that we already have. So we have to go and pick them up, and that's why we actually add the beads separately. And you will be doing this always. It would only change which beads you start off with. So first let's finish the loop and then I'll show you. So you go through the next 2 grays like before. We'll have to go around the unit we've just added to add the copper beads that we're missing. So since we have 2, we'll be adding 2 more. So a copper bead and go through the next 2. Then take another copper bead and go through the next 2. And if you can, go through the copper bead as well. And pull. Tension is very important in all works when you're working with Miyuki, so just pull tightly. You don't want any space between these beads. Go through the next 2 grays. And then as before, when you're trying to place yourself on the side bead, remember to skip the copper beads that you've already placed before so that your unit gets the right diamond shape that we want. So I'll skip the next copper bead. I'm doing, here I go. And then I'll go through these 2 and come out of the copper bead as well. So we're ready to start the 3rd unit, and you gotta pay attention. See how my thread is coming down from the bottom this time? So we'll have to switch it around. This is completely normal because you'll be making your rounds alternating between adding first the 6 beads and then the second, and then instead the second round after that will be adding 2 beads first, going through the copper, and then adding 6. So I'll show you. So this time instead of 6 beads, we add 2 first, go through the copper base one, add 6, and go through the side one. Naturally, as you notice, we're adding the same amount of beads, but the order changes. So first you start with 6, and then the next time you start with 2, and then add the 6 later on. Also, you will notice that the direction is different. Before, we were adding the beads going from the bottom to the top. Now we're going from the top to the bottom. The direction of the thread changes automatically in raw stitch. So there isn't a left working and right working because you're always switching around between the 2. Okay. I moved between the next 2 gray beads. I'll add the 2 copper ones that I need, one at a time, obviously. So I'll switch between the 2 next grays. When you're adding the copper, you have to make sure that your work is nice and tight. Add the second copper and go through the next 2. Once you're done with the third unit, you have to come out of the side copper bead as before, and you can see how this time it's again the thread coming out from the top. So you'll start again with the 6 beads first and then the second. So go ahead and add all the second row of this bracelet, and I'll see you at the end. So I finished the second row of my bracelet, and now I have to move so that we can start the third row. So I finished here on the side. I'll go up the 2 grays. We have to come up the top of the copper bead of the second row of the first unit. Here you go. And then we start off like we did the second row. So we'll start with the first unit, adding 8 gray beads. Four plus 4. Go back through the copper bead, making a circle. So from the other side, step up in the 2 gray beads, add a copper bead, and go on. Hold tightly so that we get the shape we're looking for. Add a second copper bead, go through the next 2 grays of the loop. Another copper bead and through the next 2 of the unit. Here you go. Then we skip the base copper bead like before so that we get a nice and tight diamond. Right, and that's the first unit done. Now, I wanted to show you also something. Before I was working from my left towards the right, and then as you can see, I'm again working from the left to the right. This is because once I finished my second row, and I ended here, I automatically switched the sides to continue going in the same direction. It's always easier to go in the same direction in which you're comfortable. Now I'm left-handed, so I go from left to right. You guys have to figure out what's best for you. I also keep my work this way when I'm working. So I actually keep it this way, and you can see that my thread is coming up at the top. So the second unit is first 6 beads. 6 beads, yep. And then we go back through the side, the top bead, so I can show you the same. 2, go through the side copper bead. So I'm effectively working this way, adding the copper beads around, skipping always the 2 in between. And then I'll skip the base one as usual to tighten up the diamond. Skip again the side one as well. See how it ends up better. And then we go through the side one again, ready to start a new unit. So obviously when I'm keeping my work this way, I always keep it this way with the side of the working thread towards the hand that keeps my needle. So since I'm left-handed, it's on the left side. But if you were right-handed, you'd be keeping it the opposite side, so this way. And just work easier this way. Okay, so add the third row and I'll see you to add the clasp. Once you finish the third row of the bracelet, we gotta attach the clasp. So I've done that already on the beginning of my bracelet, as you can see, using the tail thread that I've closed, and now I'll show you how to do it on the other side, so you'll be able to do both. So fold the bracelet without opening the clasp so that you can hook it correctly. Come out of a side bead, one of the first ones on either side, not the central one, the copper one, and add 3 beads to your thread, and then go through the first loop of the clasp, add another 2 beads, again gray, and go back through the copper bead that you began with, from the opposite side from where you started off. to make a loop, like such. Then we have to go back through all the beads and the clasp to reinforce this loop that we've just made, since you can see that it's coming apart. So we gotta go through everything. So 3 beads, the clasp, the 2 beads on the other side of the clasp, and again, the copper bead. And pull tightly. I reinforce it a 3rd time. So I go through the 3 beads again, and then through the loop, and then through the 2 beads, and then through the bead. We got it. Then you have to move around with the beads to come out the next side bead and repeat the same thing. So I'll show you once again. Come out of the copper bead and we're ready to do the second loop. Add 3 beads, pass through the loop, try and make it the same way. So last time I came out from on top, so we do the same thing from under. Add 2 beads, go back through the copper bead. Don't get your thread hooked up anywhere. Pull tightly, like this. And then you go back. It's important that you have no thread showing between the beads while it's on the clasp. Show you in a second how to tighten it up so that you don't see it. And what I mean by that. So I've reinforced it already a 2nd time. You can't tighten it up until you've reinforced it once. So here, you see how the beads are open and there's actually thread laying on the loop. We don't want that. We want the beads to cover the thread completely. So you have to jiggle it a bit with the tension and pull so that your beads end up closing closer by to the thread and not letting it be seen. Done that, you have to go through it again, making sure the tension keeps. And now you're ready to move on to the 3rd copper bead on the side to be able to do the last loop for the clasp. So moving around. When I move around, I don't go through the copper beads that I find in between. I skip it because it's not in the right direction to be able to move to this bead. So take that into account. Pull, and then I'll quickly do this loop so that I can show you how to close the thread if you haven't seen or haven't done anything before, so that you know how to close it. We close the thread with a 1/2 hitch knot always, and that's the same thing for whichever project you're doing with Miyuki. I always do knots in a progression, so at least 2 spaced apart for each thread that you're closing. So both tail threads and working threads will have to be closed in the same way. I don't like going through and just weaving my thread, but I prefer blocking it with the thread, with a knot. Okay, so I've done the 3rd loop as well, checking again that my thread is nice and tight and I don't see any thread. Okay, yeah, that worked. Here you go. So we're ready to end the thread. So I'll move around to go out of this copper bead on the border, right here. And the 1/2 hitch knot is made this way. You pass under the thread that goes between 2 beads, right after the bead I'm coming out from. Pull, you get a loop, go through the loop with my needle and pull tightly so that the knot closes. So it's the same way as if adding new thread. You have to always do a 1/2 hitch knot. Then I'll move around a few beads over to come out the next copper bead on the border. So I'll skip again this copper bead, I'll skip it and go through these 2 gray beads. And if I can, both the copper bead. And then I'll pass under, pull, go through it and pull tightly. And that's it. That's all it takes. And then you have to cut the thread, and you'll have to do it on the other side as well. And that's your bracelet finished. That's all for today, bead friends. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you have any questions or comments, you can place them below. Remember to sign up to the channel by clicking the bell below so you will be alerted every time a new tutorial comes up. You can find the kits for the bracelets on our site, which is www.happybead.it. And you can also find there all our other tutorials in the section free tutorials. We ship worldwide. Also, you can follow us on social media to see all our beady goods. And on Facebook, you can see us as Happy Bead, La Fabbrica delle Perline. And on social media, you can find us as Happy Bead Milano. Thank you for watching and take care.